In many countries, the government is one of, if not the biggest employer out there. It is so large, it is defined as an entire sector, namely the public sector. And while it is already huge, the public sector continues to grow in many countries. This is also the case for Germany. In the period between 1991 and 2008, the postal service and the train service were privatized. The nearly 2 million employees that belonged to those services were now no longer employed by the state, reducing the size of the public sector from 6.7 million to 4.5 million. However, in the years since that change, the public sector has grown immensely. In the 10 years after that, after 2008, it is employing again as many people as prior to the privatization of the postal and train services. This trajectory is likely to continue and can be seen across many different countries. So, what would happen if everyone really worked for the public sector? If it just becomes so big it gobbles up all the private entities so that we all end up working for the state? Welcome to Rebel Economics. Today we will look at exactly that question. I'm excited to invite you to a new thought experiment today, and if you enjoy them, make sure to like and subscribe. When you look at the different sizes of the public sector of countries, you quickly find one common denominator amongst those with the largest public sector. Most of them are or were communist countries in their recent history. Cuba is the most extreme example here, with the largest public sector in the world relative to population size. 77% of Cubans actually work for the public sector. This is reminiscent of the late 80s in the Eastern Bloc of Europe. While communism was still in full swing there, between 70 and 90% of all employees worked for the public sector. But for this thought experiment, I would like to point out that we would remain in a capitalist and democratic system. And to some extent, don't we all already work for the government anyways? After all, if you're taxed at around 30%, then you too are working 1/3 of your time for the state. Working for the government is well known for coming with a lot of great benefits. In the US, where health insurance is not automatically provided by the employer, working for the state has the huge advantage of including these benefits, plus many other benefits programs like life insurance or dental. Also, federal retirees and their survivors are eligible for these benefit programs, so you know you and your family will be well taken care of even after you stop working. Also, working for the government gives you a lot of job security. In Germany, for example, if you have worked for more than 15 years in the public sector or are over 40 years old, you're literally unfireable. This would most likely also be the case in our scenario. Since the government would be the only employer, firing someone would relegate them to unemployment by default. So if you really are entirely inept at what you do, chances are you would perhaps be moved to a different part, but never be fired. But let's look at the bigger picture here. If everyone worked for the government, that would mean that the private enterprises would be nationalized. From supermarkets to car manufacturers to manicurists. Every single company would now be state-owned. Of course, in real life, this would be something coming very slowly, giving business owners lots of time to move their operations abroad. But let's just assume that this happened from one day to another, and also let's ignore the inevitable protests and upheaval that this would bring with it. With everything nationalized, that would mean that really everything is kind of the same company. The distinction between Lidl and Aldi, for example, would be swept away as everything would be under the control of the state, meaning that supermarkets would no longer have to compete with one another. It's all the same. So really, this would create a system of complete monopolies. We talked about the issues of monopolies in our video, How Do You Break a Monopoly? The main points being that as there is no more competition, the price inefficiencies will skyrocket. Prices increase while the services or products oftentimes do not improve in quality. That at least is the case when monopolies are companies owned by individuals looking to make a profit. And while making a profit is also in the interest of the government, after all, with having everyone employed by the government, it would have to pay a lot of salaries, and the money needs to come from somewhere. but the benefits derived from pumping up the price will not be the same when done by the government in comparison to private entities. After all, this is a closed system. If the price for food increases drastically because there's no competition, then the people will need higher salaries to pay for the food, which the state in return would have to pay, essentially just causing inflation. And speaking of salaries, how would the state afford them? At the moment, this is derived from taxing both employees and the companies, but if everything is the state, would that still make sense? Probably not. The state could just pay lower salaries and in return not require anyone to pay taxes. It could take all of the profits that a company makes and pay the salaries directly to the employees, since they're all employed by the state anyways. So the entire system would change. Considering how productive the private sector is and how much revenue it creates, the state would start off pretty well. It can take the revenues of the private sector and pay its many employees. But once incorporated into the public sector, productivity would likely go down. There is a reason the public sector is full of bureaucracy, and this too would invade the aspects that were once run privately, causing inefficiencies, delays, and far too many levels of hierarchy for anything to function productively. But why am I so sure productivity would decrease? Well, for one, it is the many benefits that the state offers their employees as well as the payment structure. Having such high levels of job security removes the incentive of doing well. Without the fear of losing your job, many people would become complacent, and productivity would decrease. Even those who are not driven by the fear of losing their jobs would find little incentive to remain high performers. Salaries in the public sector tend to be based on years of experience instead of performance. So even those with high motivation would soon be beaten down to mediocrity by the system. And this is not even the worst of it. Yes, productivity would likely go down, but what would really cripple the economy is a lack of innovation. The private sector is the main driver of new ideas. It is more agile and more prone to taking risks that might pay off big time. Without the dog-eat-dog world that the private sector is, innovations would stagnate. And I do not see a way that the state could make up for it, meaning that while the existing economy would survive on its current levels with slightly lower production, it will surely not be able to compete for long. Remember how earlier I said that this was a closed system? Well, I lied. Looking at the internal consequences is a lot easier if you leave out the question of what would happen to international trade. So I put it off until now, but as it is always with procrastination, your problems don't actually go away. So let's talk about trade. While in the past a high employment rate in the public sector was coupled with communism, it is hard to look at history for guidance on this question. But I do think that this comes with a certain affinity to be inwards looking. If so, this could severely damage trade relations. With lower production rates, the products derived from such sectors would become more expensive, making them less desirable both on the international market as well as the national one. This state, where everyone works for the government, would no longer be able to compete with the foreign products. At first, not in price, and soon no longer in quality, as the private companies abroad will continue to innovate. To protect its own products, higher import tariffs would be put on foreign imports in order to even out the price difference. In turn, other countries would do the same, making the products from the country where everyone works for the government even more undesirable. As you can imagine, this could not go on for long, especially not in the interconnected and interdependent world we live in today. Every country needs some resources or products from another country, so starting a tariff war would quickly lead to the economic downfall of the country, an economic crisis for everyone who thought their cushy stable jobs were just perfect, and the end of our thought experiment. Everyone working for the government would surely not be a good idea. I think one way or another it would definitely end up with the economic downfall of the country. But more so, I am left asking, can there even be such a thing as a capitalist democracy without a private sector? Looking at everything we have discussed today, I have to say no. I think the private sector and capitalism are intrinsically linked. Without the private sector, without competition, and without innovation, capitalism cannot survive, nor can a country's economy. Thank you for watching Rebel Economics. I really enjoyed the making of today's video, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. If so, subscribe to our channel and like the video. We would really appreciate the support. Also, why not check out some of our other videos? Norway has a huge public sector itself, so why not check out our video about its oil fund and how it is being used? Or, for something a bit more light, check out our video on why company mascots exist. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.